Good morning, class. I'm Deborah Das, Assistant Professor of English. I'll take your 66114 course code, that is English poetry. And today we will study The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. So, uh, as you have already studied, uh, as you have already attended the uh, first class, introductory class of our Rape of the Lock, uh, we talked about a few things like it was written in the Augustan age. Augustan age, that is also known as this thing or restoration. So, what do we which period do we call a restoration period? It's from 1660 to 1759. So what are the major things that has happened in this time and this period? So I'll be talking about that as well a little bit. So during this time, King Charles, he was the monarch, and and there was a huge what to say uh, mm, revolution that was going on in that period of England, and the monarchy was replaced by parliament. And during and before that time, before 1 century, from 1 century ago, there was this conflict between the Protestant sect of Christianity and the Catholics. So, Catholics are the people, as I have discussed earlier, Catholics are the people who have started following the Pope and the Church, and Protestants were more orthodox, who had followed uh, the Holy Book itself, and not they didn't rely on any secondary, or let's say parts of other things that has come later on, um, like say the Pope or the Church. So today I want to elaborate on a few things that is in context to your poem, "The Rape of the Lock," the social and political context of that time, the religious context. So as you know that this was the time when uh, a new sect of Christianity was becoming popular, and even today there are sects of Christianity that you see, even in Agartala, where your this educational institute is situated. So if you go to the churches here, even if you go our Saint Paul's, and if you see the Don Bosco's or the Holy Crosses, they have some different ideologies that they follow. So this thing. So this was the term. So with this advancement, there were many poets, many writers that has emerged in those times. So one of the two of the most prominent poets of those time who has come in those period was Alexander Pope, and the second one, that is our John Milton. What did John Milton write? John Milton wrote about Paradise Lost, so which is close contrasted to stories of Bible. Okay, so yeah, so but we have to also see the background of these poets, and where they are coming from, and you know what ideologies they followed, or like because with their ideologies there comes a repulsion with with their counterpart. So let's say the poet we are taking is Alexander Pope. So Alexander Pope was a Catholic. So Catholic, and therefore he was a outsider for the Protestant dominated world. Okay, so So in Protestant, many of the noblemen came, many of the people who belong to the royal family or the royal structure. So this was also the time when parliament came in, and the monarchy didn't have the absolute power at this moment of time. So sorry for this thing. Okay, so what happened at this time? Uh, the monarchy, they followed the Protestant sect of Christianity much. For Pope, who is an outsider and who is a Catholic, for him, seeing from the other eye and criticizing them, uh, became a part of his work and legacy. When we talk about the poems or the kind of poetry, works of poetry that came after Pope, we call it post Pope, or like, so it was like a milestone. The Pope's writing was like a milestone in history of English literature. So whatever came later on, we sort of label it as poetry after Pope. Even in a Routledge handbook of this history of English literature by Ronald Carter and John McCready, so they write it like that. They mention that poetry after Pope. So you can understand how crucial, how important was Pope at that time, and in that social structure, in the backdrop of that context, how important was his poetry. So let's just get into the next thing. So how people lived in those times. So there obviously in a feudal world, which is transcending to parliamentary system. It had just transcending. No, it was the first phases, right? At this moment of time, uh, the people, they had a huge class difference between them. Obviously there was religious, what to say, repulsion between one another inside Christianity. So in this backdrop, you can also see that, how Pope uses satire, wits, okay, these things to describe their counterparts. Counterparts are the Protestants. And who are these Protestants? Mostly the Protestants were from the royal family, or say the noblemen's, okay, landlords. So these still had that orthodox. They still had had followed the orthodox form of Christianity. So uh, in this backdrop, obviously they were wealthy people. And as you know, till this time, if you see our the wealthy people in our country, people like Ambanis and Adanis and all other billionaires, they like to show off their weddings, they like to show off their cars, jewels, all these things. Okay, so if you even see the things like IPL ownerships, these are part of glamour world. In a way, cricket and Bollywood, all those things becomes a part of glamour world. So but even if you see, when the owners don't get their this profits and all, they get one huge profit in terms of like winning on those things. Okay, let's say a particular team is never winning, nothing, they have nothing, but still the owner gets a branding. So he or she uses that brand value very well. So the part, this glittering, this what to say, showing off part was a huge part in those huge thing in those times in the Augustan time. So people liked to show off. So when they show off, what do they do? One is makeup, one is jewelry, and another is language. They obviously the novels used to speak this the Latin language or so. So like that. So they always like to be different. They like to remain different, and some untouchable people from the other sects of society. So if you see, for them, beauty was a very important thing. Like this girl in our story, in our mock epic poem, the Belinda gets for sets for this thing, makeup for hours. Like even if you see in those times, like we are talking about 1660 to 1780. So in those times, even if you see in movies, the Britishers, the Britons, they used to what they used to put makeup. The men, they used to put makeup in their face. They used to put lipstick. They used to put highlights in their cheeks. So all those things were there. And if even if you have seen those men, they used to put the what to say, wig, the curly hair wig. If you have seen the governors of India with wigs and stuff, you might have seen earlier these things were there. So in a world where men were putting this kind of makeup, you can understand the beauty standards for the women of those times, right? So Belinda is one such classic example of beauty standard, and the irony that comes with these superficial things in those times. So let's proceed to next slide. So we'll talk about mock heroic epic a little bit. So what is mock heroic epic? As you have seen in my last classes, I have explained to you what is an epic poem. Epic poem is a long poem that shows chivalry, that shows a warrior character of the hero. So there will be a protagonist. So everything will be to pump up the protagonist features. Let's say his characters, his strengths will be his religious following, the religion he follows. How much value of religion he puts into his character. So all those things, makes a heroic character in an epic. Let's say the example of our Beowulf, or let's say even if you see Ramayana, Mahabharata, these are the epics of the eastern side. So if you see Iliad, Odyssey, all those things, those are or say let's say Beowulf, these are the epics of that side, western part of the world. Okay, so these things are there. So you understand now what is epic poetry. So if you make a mock epic, what will it be like? When I'll talk about the poem a little bit. So what happens in this poem is that someone so there is a gathering of the aristocrats, and someone cuts a little bit here from the lock they make now in women. So cut the hair of Belinda in Rape of the Lock, and the first she makes, the drama she makes after that. So this poem will be about that, and how to make petty things this big. So with the help of irony and wit, Sir Alexander Pope makes it. Just mocks that society, mocks Belinda, mocks the people of that sphere. So for your information, I would also say that Pope at that time was a part of that what to say that aristocrat a class of people, but at the same time he had extensively criticized about the fuss, about the about the show off, or let's say what to say, superficiality that the people of those times carried. So moving on, and these things I have described. So I have talked about the introduction to Belinda's this thing as well in this lecture. So we'll get back. We'll go directly to the canto. Canto one. So what happens in the canto is that poem Sophia opens with a presenting a trivial incident. What is the trivial incident? That there is this lady Belinda who has a long lock of her hair. Okay, so one of the noblemen who is later called Baron, he cuts her hair. So what happens? It became a big fuss in the party, like as if what to say, big thing had happened, big mistake that he did. Let's see the particular word, sorry. Okay. Mm, it becomes almost like Baron had assaulted Belinda. Uh, but in real, what he did, he just cut a lock of her hair. Nothing more. It's a like, but if you see, the beauty standard has gone so up. Maintaining Belinda's hair and its locks. These were one of the, this meant the world to Belinda. So, we are not here talking about Belinda, even if you see from a point of view, obviously, Belinda would be, furious. Any girl would be furious if you cut her hair. But if you see, this is a lock of one's hair. It's not a huge thing. No one, people doesn't become physically, uh, what to say. This is not a physically vulnerable situation, but it becomes so. Why? But it becomes a big emotional fuss because society has taught us that way. That this is the beauty standards. Uh, a girl has to be like this. Her facial structure has to be like this. Uh, her skin tone has to be of a certain color. Her hair must be long. So society with its discourses, with its what to say, negotiations from centuries have taught us that this is beauty standards. This particular type, this particular standard of women are attractive. Okay, by the society standards, by the fast of this world, this becomes a very emotionally touchy topic, a very emotionally sensitive thing for Belinda. And Belinda was not just a regular girl. You have to understand. Belinda means, as appreciated by the society standard, Belinda also belonged from the nobles. Okay. So, even today we read about these things. Okay. Feminism is not the same for the rich women, rich working women, and a housewife uh, in the poorest of the poor families. By many means, multiple means, these things are different from one another by miles. Same with Belinda. So when she is coming from a particular layer of the society. Maybe it's a patriarchal society, but she's a woman from the aristocratic layer of the society, the noble layer of the society. So her sentiments are quite high. She is not, what to say, submissive. Her situation doesn't make her submissive anyway. Quite frankly, the people of that time had no privilege to read and write and study. But noble people, whether it's men and women, both studied. So Belinda was privileged, and her tantrums will be as high as a man. That situation of her lets her be that sentimental. So okay, so moving on. But what Pope is saying is, this simple act of cutting a lock of her hair, a little bit, it may be, drives her mad. It makes her, senile. Why? Because in those period of times, with societal penetration of values in beauty standards, makes Belinda think that a huge amount of her worth is indeed in her long hair. So that's the thing. Moving on. So Belinda in the Canto 2, what happens? Belinda prepares herself for society, for the party. She's going to engaging in an elaborate toilet ritual. Toilet rituals mean uh, बोल रहा है ना in Hindi 16 श्रृंगार करना. You do a lot of makeup and these things, to be ready for any function. So that kind of thing. And then her beauty is portrayed by powerful influential man and even nature, which can influence anything, like let's say Belinda was the star of the party. Whenever Belinda were to make an entry in a party or any social gathering, she just lights up the party, let's say, not the energy of the party, people say. So maybe you see these films, and when you see a hero, a Salman Khan making entry or a Katrina Kaif making entry in the scene, there is the impact of that scene becomes high, so maybe Belinda in that period was of that worth. She was the princess of her party. Okay, moving on. Hmm. Her beauty is so these are some of the what to say comparative analysis that Pope makes in his poetry, that her beauty is very powerful, that influence man and woman, and even nature. Okay, everything. So travels by boat to Thames, on the Thames to Hampton Court. What is Thames? So like we have Ganges in our country, they have the Londoners have Thames River, their main river. So she goes to a particular party, and then Arian assigns ships to guard her. So these are particular, celestial bodies, or like fairies that Alexander Pope puts in the poem. Actually, in real, fairies don't go with you, but just to make an impact in the poem, and show, like, because he's writing a mock epic. So in epic, all these things are regular, like you'll see fairies, you'll see dragons, these things are there. But in real, he compared Belinda like a fairy princess, like with whom some Ariel, these things goes fairies, so with fairy princess, other small songs, fairies, like this thing travels. So okay, despite vigilance, aerial senses, and unknown threat. So obviously those names, see this particular small fairies, uh, they follows their Belinda, uh, but one of them, particularly senses that a threat is around. Let's say, like, what happened. So at Hampton Court, so what is Hampton Court? Hampton Court is a place where this functions takes place. All the other noblemen gather around. It's like a party for the aristocrats, okay, for the noblemen. So with Caesar, he cuts Belinda. So they're in the party. So Belinda goes, maybe she's talking to someone. Okay. So, but what happens? There is a particular gentleman who comes and cuts off Belinda's lock of the hair, realizing Belinda secretly harbored a worldly desire. Okay. And Ariel withdraws. The safe failed to stop him. So the small fairies, they fail to protect Belinda. Okay. So the guy Baron cuts her hair, and Canto ends with the rape completed, like some kind of assault to her uh, hair, like it's a huge thing. Okay, so moving on, the cutting they compared, Alexander Pope compared with a serious assault, so it's a huge thing. So two of our this thing left. Mm, I would rather wrap up the class here with some of the let two cantos. I'll leave two cantos in the later class. The next class, I will elaborately talk about, means we will revise the whole thing, the other three classes and this class, and I have given you some questions here at the end of this cantos. So your work will be to analyze this question. If you can answer, you should answer at least three out of the five questions and show me in the next class. You can send me in my official mail, or okay, so that will be good if you send me in my official email or WhatsApp. You can send there. Okay, so here two cantos are left, and we'll summarize the whole thing with the left two cantos. For now, I will end this class, but I want to say one thing as well. As soon as possible, submit your these things, assignments. Okay. So we'll see you in next class.